heavenly King, comforter, the Spirit of truth, who art everywhere present and fillest all things, treasure of blessings and giver of life, come and abide in us and cleanse us from every impurity. Save our souls, O good one. Okay. So we'll do chapter 14 tonight, and I'm not sure if we'll get into 15 or not. That's too much for one session. But so Basari, you want to read?
Step 14, on the clamorous yet wicked master, the stomach. We have been attacking ourselves in everything that we have said, but this is especially so when we speak about the stomach. For I wonder if anyone has got free of this master before settling in the grave. Gluttony is hypocrisy of the stomach, for when it is glutted it complains of scarcity, and when it is loaded and bursting it cries out that it is hungry. Gluttony is a deviser of seasonings, a source of sweet dishes. You stop one jet and it bobs up elsewhere. You plug this too and you open another. Gluttony is a delusion of the eyes which receives in moderation but wants to gobble everything at once. Satiety in food is the father of fornication, but mortification of the stomach is an agent of purity. He who fondles a lion often tames it, but he who coddles the body makes it still wilder. The Jew rejoices on Sabbaths and feast days, and a monk who is a glutton on Saturdays and Sundays. He counts beforehand the days till Easter, and he prepares the food for it several days in advance. The slave of his belly calculates with what dishes he will celebrate the feast, but the servant of God considers with what graces he may be enriched. If a stranger comes, the slave of the stomach is moved to love entirely from gluttony, and he regards laxity for himself as consolation for his brother. When others are present, he deems it right to allow himself wine, and thinking to hide his virtue, he becomes a slave of passion. Often vanity proves an enemy of gluttony, and they quarrel between themselves for the wretched monk as for a purchased slave. The one urges him to relax, while the other proposes that he should make his virtue triumph. The wise monk will shun both, and at the right time shaking off each passion by the other. As long as the flesh is still lusty, let us observe temperance at all times and at every place. When it has been pacified, which I do not suppose is possible this side of the grave, let us hide our accomplishment. I have seen aged priests bewitched by the demons, and on the feasts they gave their blessing to young men not under their direction to use wine and all the rest. If those who give permission have a good witness in the Lord, or are spiritual, then let us also permit ourselves within limits. But if they are negligent, let us not give a thought to their blessing, especially when we are in the actual heat of the struggle with our flesh. Evagrius, afflicted by an evil spirit, imagined himself to be the wisest of the wise both in thought and expression. But he was deceived, poor man, and proved to be the most foolish of fools in this among other things. For he says, when our soul desires different foods, then confine it to bread and water. To prescribe this is like saying to a child, go up the whole ladder in one stride. And so, rejecting his rule, let us say, when our soul desires different foods, it is demanding what is proper to its nature. Therefore, let us also use cunning against our unscrupulous foe. And unless a very severe conflict is on us, or amends for falls, let us for a while only deny ourselves fattening foods, then heating foods, and only then what makes our food pleasant. If possible, give your stomach satisfying and digestible food, so as to satisfy its insatiable hunger by sufficiency, and so that we may be delivered from excessive desire, as from a scourge, by quick assimilation. If we look into the matter, we shall find that most of the foods which inflate the stomach also excite the body. Laugh at the demon who, after supper, suggests that you should take your meal later in future. For the next day, at the 9th hour, he will change the arrangements of the previous day. One kind of temperance is suitable for those who behave irreproachably, and another for those subject to weaknesses. For the former, a movement in the body is a signal for restraint, but the latter is affected by such movements without relief or relaxation till their very death and end. The former always wish to preserve peace of mind, and the latter propitiate God by spiritual lamentation and contrition. The perfect find their time of gladness and consolation in the attainment of dispassion in all things. The warrior ascetic enjoys the heat of the battle, but the slave of the passions revels in the feast of feasts and the triumph of triumphs. The heart of gluttons dreams only of food and eatables, but the heart of those who weep dreams of judgment and castigation. Master your stomach before it masters you, and then you are sure to control yourself with the aid of shame. Those who have fallen into the horrible gulf know what I have said, but men who are eunuchs have not experienced this. Let us prune the stomach by thought of the future fire. For some who were servants of their stomach have cut their members right off, and died a double death. If we go into the matter, we shall find that it is the stomach alone that is the cause of all human shipwreck.
Okay, are there any questions at this point? Yeah.
I mean, I guess I shouldn't take it literally, but the last line is the cause of all human sin. I mean, I don't know. It seems.
Well,
I don't
it's in other words, it's lack of fasting and self-indulgence. And the self-indulgence in one thing leads to self-indulgence in other things. So that a pattern of self-indulgence happens, and thus everything becomes a matter of self-indulgence.
Oh, that's the principle. Not so much. It could be the food, but not.
Yeah, it's not the proximate cause; it's the underlying.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Sorry.
After you.
So the part where he talks about a vagaries,
Uh-huh.
it seems like he's saying that temperance is better than simply just flat out like destroying yourself, trying to deny.
Right. It's temperate. Saint Benedict put it very well. Moderation in all things. And going off and our tradition is not to go and become some kind of sadhu where you tie yourself up in a little knot and sit naked in the desert and meditate without eating for months or weeks at a time, or some kind of crazy.
That's what my saint did.
Yeah.
Well, he
No,
didn't tie
he ate
himself
once
up.
a week.
He went 40 days without eating once.
That was repeating the Jesus
So can you even get up
prayer
and walk?
for 40 days, as Christ did, I believe. Right?
Uh-huh.
I don't know how many saints repeated that.
Very few.
Very few. Yeah. Just don't. You're going again like into radical.
In other words, it's not about being radical. In other words, it's a marathon, not a sprint. You can't keep up not eating for very long.
Saint Basil the Great, right? He died of liver disease because he was actually Jew-aesthetic.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
He was,
I mean,
He
that's
was young. I mean,
No,
was quite
he
young.
wasn't young. Like he was bishop at 41, so.
he wasn't bishop for that long. Yeah, he was early 50s.
That's pretty young.
Okay. I mean, the part about Easter,
Mm-hmm.
preparing a feast for Easter.
Mm-hmm. Planning it all out.
I mean,
That's all you can think about on Good Friday.
Yes, exactly.
All of Holy Week.
I mean, how is that bad? I mean, if you've been, refraining from something the entire time.
Because that's not the point.
Exactly.
The point is, Jesus Christ is going to his passion and you're worried about what you're going to have for dinner. He's being betrayed by one of his friends, and you're worrying about, how many ribs to buy.
But that's after how many days of fasting, though?
It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. I mean,
You see, this is the thing. People get all caught up, and this is actually a lack of temperance and a lack of moderation. If you think you're doing something great by your fasting, and you're putting all your effort into it, and you think, now I'm really holy, now I'm really, doing it, I've gone all of Lent and I haven't eaten anything with a single gram of whey in it according to the packages, and I've read all the labels and I know it. And all you are is a Pharisee. And you might as well go have a steak on Good Friday.
Okay.
Because undoubtedly, if you've done that, you're judging your brothers.
Uh-huh.
And so the point is, stay focused. Stay focused on, the gospel readings, stay focused on the Lenten efforts, stay focused on repentance. Repentance is not, the Pascha cheese didn't come out very well last year, and so I better try a new recipe. No, that's not repentance.
Are you saying that if the Pascha cheese didn't come out well last year, we need to keep doing the same? I'm sorry, I'm making a really bad joke.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's all about that's not, we make Lent about what we're eating, and that's that we're missing the whole point. Because if you make it all about eating and drinking, whether it's what you are eating or what you're not eating, you're still missing the point.
Well,
It's like the two disciples. Jesus tells the disciples he comes down from the transfiguration. They saw him transfigured. He says, we're going down to Jerusalem. I'm going to be murdered and tortured and murdered. And they said, well, can I sit on your right side and on your left? It's like clueless. And how many times are we clueless? Sometimes we need to translate it into, contemporary idiom. Which is, and in my guess, in some of the gospel stories, actually it isn't. It's in their contemporary idiom, but we don't speak New Testament Greek. But it would be about the same.
You're saying like the Lent is not really, but you're refraining yourself from all the stuff you could have.
Yeah, you keep the rules, but that's not the point of Lent.
After 50 days, you'd be dreaming about the steak a little bit.
No, not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Fried eggs, maybe.
I find it hard to find Lenten options when I go get food. Oftentimes I eat out during lunch at break because I don't pack a lunch at work and I get really hungry.
So why don't you pack a lunch?
Why don't you pack a lunch?
Well, because I'm lazy and negligent.
Peanut butter sandwich. Peanut butter sandwich.
But,
Peanut butter and jelly.
yeah.
Well, then you do your best.
It's almost every time, like even if it's like a vegetable sandwich, it comes with cheese. Every time. Oh, thank you.
Well, like you don't necessarily have to have ham on it,
Oh, that's...
right?
Yeah.
Or, but the point is not what you eat. The point is how you eat it.
Do you love your neighbor?
Right.
That's the point.
That's the point. Are you being nice to him?
So when I first became Orthodox, my
neighbors
first
hate
Lent,
me.
first day of my first Lent, I'm working at a restaurant, and they just decided on the first day of Lent, it's completely unrelated. They're gonna gut out the restaurant, clean it out, and we're gonna not gonna be open, and we're gonna all and during lunch we're all gonna get Chick-fil-A. They're gonna have this whole get together where it's gonna be great. And I'm like, oh no. It's like a bunch of free chicken. And
was it?
I didn't eat it. And I was like, and people noticed, and then I felt weird about people noticing, and then it was like this whole conundrum to me. I'm like, well, now everyone knows that I'm fasting, and it's weird. Mm-hmm. So I figured if that happens ever to me again, I'd just eat the chicken. Because it's just to not stick out. But,
Well, so instead of indulging your gluttony, you indulged your vainglory.
yes. I didn't. Yeah.
See, it's useful. These categories are really useful when you analyze your behavior. So why didn't you eat the chicken? Well, you didn't want it. You didn't want to break the Lent, but instead you made a public show of not eating the chicken, and so they thought, oh, he's acting holy again.
He's vegetarian, maybe.
So you could pass that off, except for all the rest of the time you're eating meat. So it's you can't.
Just for a day.
I've decided to try vegetarianism again for the next 40 days or so.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So
Is it? So you're saying for us it's a matter of temperance and sort of self-control and what we eat.
yeah.
Is it the same for a monk? Is there a difference?
There's no difference. For the monks, it's easier because presumably in the trapeza,
The food is already done.
it's all prepared, and you just eat what's put before you. And if you think, oh, this is too nice, or oh, this is too rich, or oh, this is too extravagant, and I can't be seen eating something like this. Vainglory,
Okay.
or want to project, all my coworkers are here, but they know that I'm Orthodox, so they have to see me how I fast.
It's
But I mean, if you still want to fast,
What does the Lord say about fasting?
you got me there.
Uh-huh.
Drawing a blank.
Your homework, Matthew, chapters 5 through 7.
Can I spoil it for him, or does he need to?
What?
Can I spoil it for him, or?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, he basically says to do it in secret, and he said those who tear their clothing and put on sackcloth and ashes, which is what they did back then, is a sign of great mourning. They had already received their reward. So those who make a big show of it, that's their reward, is the fact that they made a big show of it and everyone saw.
Rather than a reward by God.
Yeah, instead of getting rewarded in secret for those things you do.
What if you have an Orthodox roommate and you know he's fasting anyway?
That's in private. In the monastery, there were some awards that I wanted to hand out, but, well, some of them I won't talk about. But one of them was a sausage on Good Friday.
Mm.
For having made yourself the biggest Pharisee of
Who was the holy fool that was eating the sausage again?
Saint Basil the Blessed.
Great.
But Saint John Chrysostom says if you devour and consume your brother, you might as well just go have steak. Your fasting is meaningless.
Interesting.
They don't make it easy.
What's that?
I said they don't make it easy. It's just you can't win.
Well, but the point is, you do it unto God. You do it quietly, and you don't make a big deal about it.
Mm-hmm. I had
because keeping the rule is not what the fast is about. The fast is about repentance, which means transformation of mind, which means remembering God, which means turning away from your sin, which means looking at being watchful of your mind, and digging out areas where you're harboring resentment and hatred and all of this other stuff, and repenting of it and getting rid of all of that. And that's what it's all about. It's all about Lent is all about purification. It's the whole point. It's purification. And the food is only one little aspect to remind us. But there's all this other stuff in our life which needs purification, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we have to work for. And the fasting is there to remind us that we're working towards the purification, not just trying to stay away from.
Bishop Basil, when he was in Russia, he ate meat for Pascha, and everybody was shocked. What's the problem? Why couldn't he? Because he's a monk, but it was served. Like you kind of have to accept what is given to you.
Right. Last time I went to St. Nina's, I accidentally ate beef, which I'm allergic to,
Oh, that's
because I thought that monasteries didn't serve that, but apparently they had a huge gift of like a bunch of ground beef from just a random donor, and they said, "Who are we to deny this? So, we're poor, we'll take it." And so.
yeah.
So
you didn't feel good anyway.
No, I purged when I found out because I get hives if I don't. So, but it was okay. Nothing happened.
There was Elder Dimitri in Santa Rosa was known for accepting whatever people brought, and somebody brought some ham or something like that on a Friday during Lent.
Okay. What do you do?
They ate it.
Okay. If someone brings cocaine.
What's that?
If someone brings cocaine, what do you do?
You call the police. Sorry.
You have to try it first.
Yeah.
If it's bad, then you I'm sorry.
It's bad.
God forgive me.
Okay. Talking about sobriety.
All right, we were on
19.
19. Yes. The mind of a faster prays soberly, but the mind of an intemperate person is filled with impure idols. Satiety of the stomach dries the tear springs, but the stomach, when dried, produces these waters. He who cherishes his stomach in hopes to overcome the spirit of fornication is like one who tries to put out a fire with oil. By stinting the stomach, the heart is humbled, but by pleasing the stomach, the mind becomes proud. Keep watch over yourself early in the morning, at midday, and for an hour before taking food, and you will realize the value of fasting. In the morning, thought leaps and runs from one thing to another. With the approach of the 6th hour of the day, it becomes somewhat quieter, and by sunset it is completely at peace. Stint your stomach, and you will certainly lock your mouth, because the tongue is strengthened by a lot of food. Struggle with all your might against the stomach, and restrain it with all sobriety. If you labor a little, the Lord also will soon work with you. Leather bottles get greater capacity if they are supple, but if they are left in neglect, they do not hold so much. He who burdens his stomach with food distends his inside, but he who wards with his stomach contracts it. And when the inside is contracted, then we cannot take much, and for the future we become fasters naturally. Thirst is often stopped by thirst, but it is difficult to cut off hunger by hunger, and even impossible. When the stomach overcomes you, tame it by labors. And if this is impossible owing to weakness, struggle with it by vigil. If the eyes become heavy, take up manual labor, but if sleep is not upon you, do not touch manual labor, because it is impossible to occupy the mind with God and mammon, that is, both with God and manual labor. Know that often a devil settles in the belly and does not let the man be satisfied, even though he has devoured a whole Egypt and drunk a river Nile. But after taking food, this unclean spirit goes away, and sends against us the spirit of fornication, telling him of our condition, and saying, Catch, catch, hound him, for when the stomach is full, he will not resist much. With a smile, the spirit of fornication comes, and having bound us hand and foot by sleep, does with us all he pleases, defiling soul and body with its impurities, dreams, and emissions. It is amazing to see the bodiless mind defiled and darkened by the body, and likewise the immaterial spirit purified and refined through clay. If you have promised Christ to go by the straight and narrow way, restrain your stomach, because by pleasing it and enlarging it, you break your contract. Attend, and you will hear him who says, Spacious and broad is the way of gluttony that leads to the perdition of fornication. And many there are who go in by it, because narrow is the gate, and hard is the way of fasting that leads to the life of purity, and few there are who go in by it. The prince of demons is the fallen Lucifer, and the prince of passions is gluttony. When sitting at a table laden with food, remember death and judgment, for even so you will only check the passion slightly. In taking drink, do not cease to imagine the vinegar and gall of your Lord, and you will certainly either be temperate or you will sigh and humble your mind. Do not be deceived. You will not be delivered from Pharaoh, and you will not see the heavenly Passover, unless you continually eat bitter herbs and unleavened bread. In bitter herbs, this is the coercion and pain of fasting, and unleavened bread, this is a mind that is not puffed up. Let this be knit to your breathing, the word of him who says, But I, when demons troubled me, put on sackcloth and humbled my soul with fasting, and my prayer stuck to the bosom of my soul. Fasting is the coercion of nature and the cutting out of everything that delights the palate, the prevention of lust, the uprooting of bad thoughts, deliverance from dreams, purity of prayer, the light of the soul, the guarding of the mind, deliverance from blindness, the door of compunction, humble sighing, glad contrition, a lull and chatter, a means to silence, a guard of obedience, lightening of sleep, health of body, agent of dispassion, remission of sins, the gate of paradise and its delight. Let us ask this foe, or rather this supreme chief of our misfortunes, this door of passions, this fall of Adam, this ruin of Esau, this destruction of the Israelites, this laying naked of Noah's shame, this betrayer of Gomorrah, this reproach of Lot, this death of the sons of Eli, this guide to impurity. Let us ask him, from whom is he born? Who are his offspring? Who crushes him? And who finally destroys him? Tell us, tormentor of all mortals, who has brought all with the gold of greed? How did you get access to us? And what do you usually produce after your coming? And what is the manner of your departure from us? And Gluttony, annoyed by these insults, raving with fury against us and foaming, replies, Why are you, who are my underlings, overwhelming me with reproaches? How are you trying to get separated from me? I am bound to you by nature. The door for me is the nature of foods. The cause of my insatiability is habit. The foundation of my passion is repeated habit, the insensibility of soul and forgetfulness of death. How do you seek to learn the names of my offspring? If I count them, they will be more in the number than the sand. But learn at least the names of my firstborn and beloved children. My firstborn son is a minister of fornication. The second after him is hardness of heart, and the third is sleepiness. From me proceed a sea of bad thoughts, waves of filth, depths of unknown and unnamed impurities. My daughters are laziness, talkativeness, familiarity in speech, jesting, facetiousness, contradiction, a stiff neck, obstinacy, disobedience, insensibility, captivity, conceit, audacity, boasting, after which follows impure prayer, whirling of thoughts, and often unexpected and sudden misfortunes, with which is closely bound despair, the most evil of all my daughters. The remembrance of falls resists me, but does not conquer me. The thought of death is always hostile to me, but there is nothing among men that destroys me completely. He who has received the Comforter prays to him against me, and the Comforter, when appealed to, does not allow me to act passionately, but those who have not tasted his gift inevitably seek their pleasure in my sweetness. The victory over this vice is a courageous one. He who is able, let him hasten to dispassion and to the highest degree of chastity.
Any questions?
So what do you mean by familiarity?
Pardon me?
Familiarity?
Yeah.
Familiarity, what is that?
That's being very casual with people. Very familiar, very kind of, instead of formal.
Okay.
In Greek culture, in Greek monastic culture.
Yeah, I don't know. It's in there. I don't know why. So what was the
Well,
spiritual aspect of that, I guess?
in Greek monastic culture, generally, the life of the brotherhood is very formal, and so Russians have a whole different take on things.
We have a word for that as well.
Yeah.
Понебратство.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's familiarity
And
to me.
Russian monastic life is очень братческий,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
I don't know. I never.
Yeah, it's very brotherly.
Okay.
Which includes, kidding and jesting and, poking each other, like boys will be boys. But in Greek, relations between brothers in public anyway is very formal. And familiarity is something that's forbidden. In other words, joking, what he referred to as lying. Remember, probably the best description of it in our colloquially is BSing. Which includes all of that kind of stuff. Now there is a context for very close brotherly relationships, but it's usually not in public in the Greek culture.
So monastery is not public anyway.
Monastic culture. Well, no, in public in a monastery means when there are people or when there's anybody around.
Okay.
So, But then, if it's just you and one other person, then you also want to strictly avoid familiarity, because one of the things that's absolutely forbidden and is a catastrophe is to develop particular relationships, particular friendships in the monastic life.
Between the monks?
Yeah.
It's natural to like somebody more than another.
Right. Well, you have friendships, but you don't want it to turn into into something romantic, or B, or B into something, into a kind of a clique where you exclude other people, and and that then it becomes unhealthy. So, but there's space for healthy monastic friendships, but the boundaries have to be very strong. So. Well, shall we go?
But I understand friendship, but when you hate someone and he is always around you, I mean, you are in the same kind of building, and that's, I think, is even more difficult to survive than when you like somebody.
And especially if you're around somebody all the time.
Exactly, all the time.
And in monastic life, you're around people, the same people, all the time. Hours and hours and hours and hours every day. So
The question is, like, in the real world, where you get this relationship with women, though, it often can lead to something romantic.
right. Well, we wouldn't have the gay movement though if romance didn't happen with men too, or women.
Yeah.
So that's there.
Anybody want some cake?
So this is specifically for monks, not for lay people, right?
The basic principles of temperance and sobriety are the same for everybody.
I mean more so with the familiarity.
Right.
It's like, how is one supposed to get married otherwise,
Right.
or?
Well, that's because in this culture the parents would have arranged it.
Oh.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
You wouldn't have to worry about such a thing.
That would be impossible.
You just show up. Hi, this is your bride. There's the priest.
But could you have situation when somebody has to move out of this monastery to go somewhere else? I mean, because he can't live with the people that are around.
Well, there are those cases.
You can get kicked out of the monastery.
Oh yeah. Well, there's all sorts of reasons to kick people out of monasteries.
And what do you need to do or not do to people?
No, no.
Well, in my monastery, any breaching of the chastity, of rules of chastity, are gone.
You need witnesses.
Hetero or homo.
Okay. Oh, okay, yeah.
Any kind of, in the Ladder, I mean, if you slandered your brother, they threw you out. But if you had somebody who was really toxic in the community, they should be removed.
They were given a chance to repent.
Well, you give them a chance to repent.
Okay.
But if they won't, what other kinds of things? If they're absolutely disobedient.
That's all the choice.
And that doesn't happen a lot.
Well, there's one
How
thing.
disobedient we're talking.
Well, there's one thing for, if people are, I made a mistake. I did something else, or and then there's defiance.
Mm-hmm.
And defiance, you give them a couple of chances, and if that's then that doesn't work in a monastery.
The McDonald's story, you kicked them out for that.
Depends on the.
How far?
There were, I had two novices at Point Reyes, and both were 21 years old, and one was a tall, lanky runner, and probably 140 pounds, but but a beanpole. And the other guy was this really built athlete who had been a hippie doing a tree sit at one time. So climbing up and down 200-foot tall redwoods. And the two were fighting because they were jealous of each other over my attention. And so they got into it one day, and the tall, lanky runner picked up the other guy, who probably outweighed him by 50 pounds, and threw him in the duck pond.
Wow.
And if I was afraid, all I could do was laugh because it was just so funny. And how could I be mad? I mean, he would get his comeuppance anyway. So, you got to use discernment. I mean, what's just boys playing with one another. That's one thing, and really kind of dark, vengeful, or defiant kinds of behavior. And there's no space for defiance in a monastery.
So you eradicated by making an example out of one of the.
Of those two? No.
No, I mean like in general. Just make an example out of somebody to eradicate defiance.
It's not a matter.
What happens?
No, because generally people are not defiant.
Mm-hmm.
Generally people are anything but defiant in a monastery. They know because they know the monastery is built on obedience, which is cooperation out of love and respect.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have somebody who's defiant, there's no love and no respect, right?
Yeah.
There's only arrogant self-will. And how do you have that in a monastery?
I don't even see how you'd be interested in monasticism with that attitude.
No, you can't. You can't be. And so especially if, for example, somebody who would be if somebody had an attitude like that, they'd still be an early novice, because they'd never get beyond that. But that's very, very few and far between.
I mean, there's hoping for those people at the monastery, improvements step by step. I don't know, somehow.
Yeah.
Don't just kick them out on the first
Right.
mistake.
Right. Well, remember the story of the one guy, and I think what did he do? He slandered one of the other monks, mm-hmm. and so the abbot made him, threw him out. But then he found out a week later that he was sitting at the gates of the monastery the entire week and hadn't even eaten. So he let him in. He let him back in.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, as a beginning novice. So
it's just not like prison strict.
what's that?
It's not like prison strict.
No.
Not that you ever get kicked out of prison.
What about behavior? That's a good one.
No, we don't have the prison to send them to. But there has to be discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And, and so for example, obviously fasting is a part of the monastic life. The whole life is a kind of it's a life of self-denial, the whole thing. So self-denial from food is one aspect of that. Well, people get the idea that in a monastery, all the monks, all they should ever serve is bread and water, and and not very much of that, and and that's not the tradition at all. In the tradition of the monasteries, both the Greek and all Orthodox monasteries that I know of, is that the food is well prepared, it's fresh, and it's plentiful. While obviously gluttony is not encouraged at all, still the monks can pretty much eat what they need. For the seminarians who had come and visit the monasteries, and in the seminaries were usually poor in Russia. So the monasteries always had really good food compared to the seminaries. And so the seminarians would all go to the monasteries
Shout out.
for a good meal, yeah.
Really enjoy that monastic life.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's compared.
Yeah. Every time I've gone to Hermitage of the Holy Cross, the food is marginally better than what I eat at home. Like, by far, yeah. Marginally, I thought.
Marginally means a tiny bit.
I mean, like, way.
Vastly
yeah,
better.
Vastly, like 10 times better than anything I cook for myself.
Well, in Valon, food was very good. It was vegetarian. There were a few things though that were, shall we say, cultural adventures. For example, it was a feast day, and they had fried fish and and all the various stuff, and there were eggs on the table. It was breakfast, right? After liturgy, and I thought, oh, good eggs, and so I assumed hard-boiled eggs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I took one, and I, hit it on the table to break it, to peel it, and it was raw. The brothers all snickered.
Why'd they do that?
What?
Why'd they do that? Have all the just raw eggs there?
Well, they thought because they eat them raw.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's culturally, it's just a different culture.
So they're immune to salmonella and botulism?
They don't care about that. They're not worried about that. Seriously.
It's a blessing.
Yeah. Now, we're going to get into this whole the gluttony thing. I think we understand it culturally, and the purity and chastity. It's really important. Number one, the context, of course, of the monastery is virgin celibacy. That's the ideal, and that's the goal, and that's the rule. Virgin celibacy. And if it's if a person isn't a virgin entering into monastic life, he needs to be a virgin from the time he enters monastic life, and maintain that virginity unspoiled. Our culture has lost the understanding of the value of virginity, which is something extremely important in Orthodox culture, and of course it's absolutely central in monastic culture. But I've found that if a culture values virginity, it will also value marriage. And if a culture doesn't value virginity, it also doesn't value marriage. So look at our culture. There's no value of virginity and there's no value to marriage. You know, people think that marriage is all about having the wedding, which is, you know, what, a big party.
It's a tax break.
Yeah, and
That's a big thing. Big tax break.
yeah,
Sorry,
but the whole point is they're missing the thing is they're missing the point. Now, of course, in monasticism, the point is, you know, is to maintain virgin celibacy, and it's not just about purity of body; it's purity of mind, and unless you keep your mind pure, the body's going to defile itself and take care of its own needs. If you're young and healthy, that'll happen anyway, but it'll be something involuntary and less than, and not voluntary. But if you allow yourself all kinds of sexual fantasies or overfamiliar relationships, and you start fantasizing about somebody and all of this other stuff, whether it's somebody who's concrete, or maybe it's a memory, or maybe it's a picture, or something like that, then all you're doing is setting yourself up for a fall. And so the point is to maintain very strictly chastity of chastity in body and chastity in mind. Now, one of the things that is discussed in here, it's, you know, some euphemisms are used, is homosexuality. And part of the reason is, in an all-male environment, that's who there is. And in an all-female environment, that's who there is. And people tend to become attached to one another, and those attachments and familiarity can breed attachment, and attachment can breed, can
Disgusting.
turn into breeding, you know. And so it's very important in the monastic context that you never let overfamiliarity develop. It's very important that you don't let particular relationships, particular friendships, which exclude others. In marriage, you have one particular relationship that is absolutely exclusive, right? Mm-hmm. With your wife. But in monasticism, you have multiple close relationships, but they're completely inclusive. There's no exclusion at all to them. In other words, it's always about community. It's always about the whole, and there can never be any physical expression of sexual intimacy. That doesn't mean you can't give a hug or something like that to somebody, but that and in fact, the very troparion that's used at the tonsure starts out, "Make haste to open to me thy fatherly embrace." So it's not like there's no human contact or human intimacy in that sense, but there's absolutely there should be nothing sexual about it. And if sexual intimacy or sexual desire arises, then it needs to be confessed, and it needs to be nipped in the bud.
If it gets confessed, then you kick the guy out of the monastery, right?
I'm not talking about acting out. Acting out.
Oh, okay.
They would both be gone.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's an attraction or something like that, then that can be worked with. So
Is it necessarily sinful to just be attracted? Every time I visit a certain monastery, I find a nun very attractive, and like I try to look away because I'm like, it's like I don't. It's weird to me. But,
well, it's all about the thoughts, right? The attraction is a thought. Is it logisme? Logismus. But then what do you do with the thought? Do you turn it into a fantasy? You start thinking about that person and imagining what they are, imagining a relationship and all of that kind of stuff. That's what has to be cut off.
It's like the McDonald's hamburger.
It's all works the same way. Also, if somebody you don't like and you're angry at, it's all the same way. It's one thing to be irritated at somebody. It's another thing to go and punch them out.
What if they give you no other choice?
Then to punch them out?
Yeah. What if they start throwing punches?
Call the police.
Well, that can, maybe.
Run away.
But not right away.
So I told you about my first Lent. My second Lent was full of a coworker who was every day trying to fight me, and I did my best. I never fought him, but it got close sometimes because it was just so aggravating because he wanted to fight all the time, and so it was a central part of my whole experience of that Lent, trying to repent while actively experiencing physical violence, the threat of physical violence.
Did he want to fight like wrestle, or did he?
No,
want
he wanted to
beat you up.
I don't know what his problem was, but he was just always wanting to throw punches, and we never did because I tried to de-escalate it, but it's the way. I'm a construction worker. I mean, people out in the construction field aren't always rational minded.
Not always rational minded in the boardroom either.
No,
No, they're not.
not anymore.
I'm in the boardroom.
Anywhere?
I'm in the boardroom.
B-O-R-E-D.
Yeah, B-O-R-E-D. Yeah.
So, yeah, well, I mean, then you have to just deal with it as it is. But, it's one thing if that's happening on a secular construction site kind of thing, and you still have to deal with it. I mean, obviously, probably the gospel advice would be to turn the other cheek, right?
I mean, how many times can you do that though?
We were all getting punched in the face. To me, it's very difficult, and I understand the virtue of it, and I struggle with that.
Yeah, the point is to de-escalate it. So, so next week we'll read chapter 15. How long's it been going? About an hour. Give or take.
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah.
Is there any practical tips on how to deal with gluttony? Is there one bullet point or 2 bullet points of things we can do?
I think you got to be moderate in all things. Eat what's put before, gospel precept. Eat what's put before you, and don't take seconds.
Don't take.
Seconds. Eat what you need, not what you want. but it's also, it's not just about what you eat. It's about, don't allow yourself to be, well, thinking about the possible menu all during Holy Week, right? Don't allow yourself to dwell on food. Don't allow yourself to dwell on, consumption of alcohol is another aspect of this. It's not dealt with specifically in the text, at least very much, but you got to be very moderate. Have an absolute limit, maybe two. An absolute limit, and there's nothing wrong with drinking alcohol, but getting drunk is wrong. Is a sin. And so everybody has a different tolerance. So know what your tolerance is. If you're buzzed, you've had too much. And the tradition does not approve of use of other substances, drugs and things like that. And medicine is one thing, but that can be abused too. But to do it for hedonism's sake. So the tradition would be absolutely opposed to the use of marijuana, the use of cocaine or opioids or any of that stuff. The use of party drugs, of course. In other words, the point is to be sober, to live soberly, and to not let that sobriety be impinged on by anything.
Does that extend to coffee and cigarettes?
Cigarettes would definitely be verboten.
What about cigars and pipe tobacco?
Tobacco products would be verboten. Vaping would be not that the fathers would have had any concept of what vaping would have been in the 6th century, but it's the whole point is what are you doing it for? It's consuming a drug.
Stress relief. Like coffee to wake yourself up in the morning.
The tradition permits coffee and tea, although in some places they don't permit coffee.
Mormon temples.
Yeah, some of the Russian monasteries don't permit coffee.
Why is that?
Chai.
It's all tea. It's a
Tea.
tea culture, not a
Tea could be very
coffee
strong,
culture.
by the way.
Yeah, so
A bit stronger than coffee.
No.
well, yeah. So anyway, so anything else before we end for the evening? All right. So let's pray. It is truly meet to bless thee, O Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, and the Mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, more glorious beyond compare than the seraphim. Without corruption, thou gavest birth to God the Word. True Theotokos, we magnify thee. The blessing of the Lord be upon you through his grace and love for mankind, always now and to ages of ages. Amen.
Amen.